My name is David Siddons. Welcome back for another episode of Better Decisions podcast. We're making a habit of this. Once again, I'm sitting here with Anna Bozovic, who is a dear friend and a long-term podcast interviewee in the Better Decisions process. This is our third time.
Yes, it is.
If you want to see our credibility, importantly,
we've been consistently correct.
We have been consistently correct. So this is the third time that we've done this. We did a first podcast in 2021. We did the second one last year at the beginning of 2022. And now, as we sit here in September 2023, we're going to go through, once again, the state of the market. Both of us are analysts. Anna, for those out there, one more time, please introduce yourself to the audience, and then we'll get into it.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you for having me here. Third time, I love it. We're documenting this transition in the world, and I'm proud of us because we've been on the money the last two podcasts.
Yeah.
So my name is Anna. I'm the founder of Analysts Miami, where I publish long-term trend analysis in the South Florida markets. I've been doing that for about the last 8 years. I'm also a broker, and this is my third time here with David. I'm very excited to be here.
So if you know anything about Anna, you know that she is, much like myself, we are eternal students of the real estate market, the analytics that go into the market, truly demystifying what's going on within the residential market in South Florida. And not just what's happening, but really why it's happening. Because regurgitation of numbers comes out every single day. We see it in the media.
Correct.
We see it from brokers. But what it means is far more relevant because we're trying to figure out where we're going next.
Correct. And numbers by themselves are just snapshots in time. You tell someone, oh, this is worth X. The median price is Y. That's great. That's what it is this second. This tells you nothing about, this gives you no ability to predict directionality. And if we want to forecast and predict where markets are trending, we have to identify the fundamental driving forces behind what we're seeing, because everything moves in cycles, and there's cycles within cycles, smaller ones within bigger ones. Nothing appears magical out of a vacuum. So if we can identify baseline, what's driving something, and where it lives within the context of the cycles of our world, then we can start to predict where it's flowing. And I think that's why we've been correct these last two podcasts, because we have identified the forces. Yeah,
and we're actually involved on the ground every day. So understanding human behavior is much easier when you talk to human beings.
Correct.
So let's go back 2021, quickly 2022, and now where we are today, because I think the backstory helps. You know, as I say, let's look at the history book to repeat itself and see what it's going to say this year. So 2021. Just give us the snapshot. That 2021 conversation that we had, which was the 6 months after the pandemic started.
Correct. And that was when we had indications that there was this shift that was taking place that was accelerated by COVID.
Looking at these behaviors in the last 6 months, talk us through what we've been seeing as the numbers as a whole, as you see it.
Sure. So starting just macro, we have this event. We have the coronavirus, which is very much, it's a black swan event. It's something that nobody could have predicted. It's here with us. We don't quite know how long, and that's part of the point. It's a period of what we can call radical uncertainty. And in many ways, Corona is accelerating trends that were already in place. Good trends, not so good trends, they're all being accelerated and amplified. Oftentimes, we talked about this, that it's this acceleration into 21st century life, that it broke 20th century habits, all these modalities of life that were defined pre-internet, and it allowed for the formation of new habits for those who can. And that South Florida was one of the places that's on the receiving end of this wealth and talent migration as the world reshifts, because the world always change is our only constant. That's it. Yeah. That's it. And it's just fascinating. Over the last few years, I've noticed there's this fallacy to human nature. Maybe it's recency bias or whatever it is. People think that how things are, how they are now, are how they always will be. And the reality can't be further from the truth. There's human ingenuity and talent always flows to the next place. And there are periods of rapid change, like there was right after World War II. And we're in one of those periods again. Yeah. And we recognize the early days of that back in our first segment.
For sure. I mean, look, I think human beings are uncomfortable with the concept of systemic change. It kind of doesn't feel nice. Right. People like to feel that the world makes sense. And if you were to say the world's under major shift, it makes people feel anxious and a little bit nervous.
Which is normal.
Which is
Correct.
normal. But it doesn't change the fact that it's still going to happen.
100%.
And you put out in 2021 that it was a systemic shift in the culture and how the country was even operating. And you went back to, post-World War II America being a certain way, and us all the way through into the 21st century still running under that premise of similar behavior until we hit COVID.
Yep, and it broke habits because people are creatures of habit. That's the thing. And habits need to break for people to reshuffle and create new ones. And that's what happened.
Yep. And then everyone came moving into Miami in great numbers, and we watched and we saw this and we commented on it and said, the commentary was, this isn't an anomaly that's going to change. People aren't just going to go back.
No. And I had great confidence in saying that because we're not just talking about a market spike. It's not just a chart in isolation. We're talking about a shift in society, and history never goes backwards, and change is inevitable. So once you see that, it becomes super clear. And also once you see the patterns of what's happening, because the migration is largely out of high tax states that were also high lockdown.
Yes.
And there were blue states that were high lockdown, and they're the ones losing high value taxpayers.
Yeah.
And the state of Florida is the biggest receiver of tax filers filing over $200,000 a year. And now we have all these indicators coming in, and this is continuing. For example, the states of California and New York both lost almost $1 trillion in AUM over the last about 2-year period, and that the state of Florida was the largest recipient of those investment offices leaving New York, and that now we have more AUM than Connecticut for the first time.
Wow, that's an interesting fact.
Yes. And this, again, 1% of taxpayers in these high tax jurisdictions account for over 40% of tax revenue. So they start leaving, you decimate your tax base. Yeah. And all this creates momentum cycles. I always talk about cycles.
Yeah, which made us scratch our heads, because I'm like, how could New York and California still keep getting it so damn wrong?
I have a great theory on this, actually.
Please
I've thought about this a lot. People,
okay, tell me.
It's New
Where's
York,
the lunacy
it's
coming from?
California, the mayor of Chicago also, right? Chicago has extreme population loss. They're not doing great. His first week when he was elected, he's saying, he introduces all this new wealth taxation he wants to put in. California verbalizes retroactive exit taxes. They have mansion taxes. New York, new taxation, all those things.
There was a number of the UAE. I remember that the big tax that came out, the mansion tax that came out in March, that killed them. And then they brought out another tax.
Now they're talking about reparations too.
It's just
what they even verbalize it. It's crazy. And so why do they, in the face of population with money exodus, why do you want to put more wealth taxes when obviously people are going to, it's obvious, it's going to accelerate the departures, right?
So why
does it follow the Venezuela model, right? Okay, so because it's obvious. So the theory here's what it comes down to. Politicians are the ones making these decisions, right? Mm-hmm. Politicians, assembly, whatever, committees, whatever it is. Politicians only care about getting reelected. When you look at it from that lens, their actions make sense because their own personal well-being and the advancement of their career, their enrichment, all that stuff hinges upon their ability to get reelected. It is not aligned with the long-term prosperity and well-being of their jurisdictions or their citizens. Yep. And that is how they take all their actions. So as budget shortfalls get worse, as people with money leave, what happens is they double down and they appeal to the growing percentage that does not pay in. And that's how they get reelected.
Which also creates further polarization. Further separation,
which is part of that segment
further
of the world that we're in right now.
Yeah. And that was one of the we raised that. I think I wanted to raise that subject as we go through this because it's one of the things that a lot of buyers turn to us every day, and they come in and say, "Well, I think the migration of Miami is now slowing down. Maybe we're reaching saturation. Maybe it's stopping. Maybe people aren't now going to move to Miami from New York or California," and we addressed this in another video where we kind of tried to debunk some of the comments that were coming out on the net, where people are saying, well, Miami people moved because it was cheap, and so let's move still, but now it's not cheap, maybe they'll stop moving. And maybe the level of money that they're making in Miami doesn't come in line with the cost of housing. But that's just not true.
No, it's not true. And of course, there was an initial surge, like a post-cataclysmic event surge, in transaction volume and like all that stuff, right? Surges don't last forever, but they equalize around new points. And that's what's happening right now. And this migration there are all sorts of indicators showing through the first 3 quarters of this year that it's still very much higher than pre-COVID levels. We have rates of license plate changes. We have the new data that we're the largest recipient of millennials, 25 to 35, who file over $200,000 a year. They're coming here. And I think that's an incredibly positive forward-looking metric.
Where do you get your statistics from? Because I think it's like a lot of the stuff comes out in the media and it's just like, well, they say things.
Oh,
and I know that Eli Barak said to me,
yeah.
I'm frustrated by being interviewed and people taking what information they want. Craig Studnicki said the same thing. I'm frustrated by the information that's going out there. Where are you getting your data from? And what's your opinion?
So we have to take control of this narrative 100%, because the press, they create headlines, and also when you report in markets as a whole, they homogenize reality and they homogenize data, and we're in a period of polarization. So it's very frustrating. So I look at, when I look at data, I always try to get as close as possible to the source. Is it IRS data?
Yeah.
Is it Brookings Institute data?
You mentioned Brookings. Brookings, what is the Brookings source of information?
I mentioned this because this is a great example of the press creating a big splash over something not true at all. So I believe this was, it was in the Journal. It was about 3 weeks ago, and it was an article entitled "What is Wrong with Miami?" or "What's Wrong with Miami?" Something like this, right? And I said, "Wow, it's pretty aggressive." Like, this
what's wrong with Miami?
And it was the subtitle.
Take that all
sorry,
sorts
the
of ways.
subheading was "First population loss in 30 years," and it made it seem like some awful, like horrible event and very portentous, like very, very bad.
Yeah,
right?
I think that pissed Craig Studnicki off as well.
So I read. I said, "What?" I said, "Wait a second." And the article was going, "Wow, first population loss in 30 years." Well, of course, there was a pandemic where people left urban cores. Anyway, they linked to they got all this data from a Brookings Institute report, which they linked to. It's free data. It's a free report. You can also download the raw data from the Brookings Institute, and like there it is. And even if you read their report, it is not the tone or the findings what the Journal said. In fact, their report tracked population across it was 38 municipalities with over 500,000 people in the country, and all but 4 in the peak COVID year had net population loss. Miami, one of them. All but 4. New York lost LA. Everybody did, right? Okay, yes, it was the pandemic. People left dense areas. It happened across the whole country. What's interesting to see is what happened after. And the next year, it was something like 8 or 12 of them. This is actually, I wrote a blog post about this. It went back to positive, and the others did not. Miami went back to positive on a city level and a county level. New York did not. LA did not. They stayed negative. Yeah. And yet this article made it seem like we were the anomaly. And actually, we're doing better than New York and LA. We went back to positive. The whole article was a travesty. And so I made a post saying, what's wrong? It should have been what's wrong with New York. And I wrote a letter to the editor. And it took them like 3-4 days, and they sent me back this.
You bothered to write a letter to the editor?
I did. They wrote me back 3 carefully worded paragraphs saying that they didn't misrepresent technically because they linked to the source data. And I said, guys,
it seems like a backdoor way of getting out of things.
It's nonsense. But the press is doing this. And it's for a number of reasons. One, I think in that case, it's sour grapes, because the median incomes of people leaving New York to Miami was it 1 year, 2020 or 2022? It was $1.2 million was the median income of a person leaving Manhattan to Miami. Yeah. In New York City itself was something like $650,000. So they're losing very high value taxpayers. And that creates holes.
I still think that's still, I will tell you, quite honestly, for everyone watching this, I had 2 conversations yesterday with relocating families coming down here. Actually, one was coming from Greenwich, Connecticut, and the other one was coming from, I want to say, San Francisco. Mm-hmm. The realities of it is that they're still coming. From my point of view, you're still seeing the same thing.
Yep.
Everyone looked at 2022, and as we go through 2023, we'll get into the 2023 conversation now. The question was, our market in 2022 was a record, and it was so high, and everyone was like, wow, the prices in Miami are bonkers. They've gone up so much. How can this possibly keep going? And then interest rates get raised, and everyone says, well, that's it, the party's over. But weirdly enough, 2022 to 2023, we still saw a rise in the value of prices within a number of sectors,
and
particularly
overall,
the luxury sector.
Year-over-year median pricing for the whole market is up too, actually.
Give us some of the statistics, because obviously you're very well researched on this. Give us the numbers that you've seen from where we are now, from last year to this year. What's happened in the last 12 months? Have you seen condo and home prices increase, and is there any particular area that you've seen it happen the most?
Okay, so the overall market, again, just looking at the medians, we're up significantly over last year. even more significantly from pre-COVID. August had so we were straight up for the last I don't know how many months. August had a slight tiny dip in median pricing for both condos and single family homes on a county level, which is normal. Nothing goes straight up, but we're hugely up year over year, and we're up versus pre-COVID. What's actually striking to me is two things. One, the extent of the disappearance of lower priced inventory, because that's also a real floor on the market. So if we look at, I actually did a whole article with the Herald on this recently. So if we look at pricing of inventory at or below the median price, let's say $600,000 for single family home, inventory's dropped almost 80%.
I don't think you can buy a home. You tell me where you can buy a home at $600,000 or under.
80% gone. It's basically gone.
And again, given the fact that we're working in the higher end of the market,
right.
I'm selling homes and my team sells homes in the primary neighborhoods in Miami,
right.
which whether it's Brickell as the urban
right.
core or Coconut Grove, Coral Gables, Pinecrest as the mainland to the south where the families are going, or Miami Beach or even Miami Shores or anywhere else like that. I don't see product at $600,000.
No, it doesn't exist. And then the other striking point, also, yes, excellent. So important to keep in mind that we have two markets, actually. And when the press or people give overall market statistics, it actually homogenizes reality, because the vast majority of transactions, just the number of them, by definition, half the market's below the median price point, right? So when we look at transaction volume overall, we're losing the story of the high end because there are far fewer transactions. So we have to parse it out to see what's happening, or we're not seeing the reality of it. And what's happening with the high end and what I like to do is I like to isolate for price per square foot, because that really filters down to new and prime location, because older stuff could be big and expensive, but it's not new, and it's not necessarily prime location, right? So if we go for expensive prices per square foot, basically it's this: the higher up we go in price per square foot, the more the market is outperforming pre-COVID realities to shocking levels. So I segment out transaction volume, for example, single family homes, Miami-Dade, 1 to 2,000 a square foot, and then past 2,000 a square foot. We're up over 400% versus pre-COVID, even this year.
Okay, so let's say that again and break that down so people fully understand the gravity of that comment, because that kind of hinges on everything that we're dealing with and everything that we're seeing.
Correct.
The luxury market, to repeat that, you're saying that the market is up when you get into the upper dollar per square foot, it's the 1,000 to 2,000 a square foot.
And then 2,000 and above.
2,000 above.
Correct.
If you are one of those buyers
right.
or potentially one of those sellers in those markets, and we're talking the newer product
right.
in the prime locations,
right.
for example, a dry lot house in Coconut Grove or Coral Gables is going to cost brand new construction or newer, which means built in the last 8 years, somewhere between $1,000 to about $1,400 a square foot. That's what it's going to be. If you get into a gated community somewhere more prime, it can be higher. If you get into water, you're over the 2,000 a square foot.
Actually, we're getting close to 4,000 a square foot now, which is shocking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've seen, we had a trade earlier this year that was a home in Key Biscayne, 4,400 square foot house, no garage, no generator, 10,000 square foot lot, built 2015, beautifully done, $3,400 a square foot.
Correct, because it's locking in that
Record
waterfront
high.
value. That's my other theory there, 100%. And just to illustrate this jump in transaction volumes, the month of August this year, for sales of, this is an accounting level, between 1 and 2,000 a square foot, had 31 sales. There were, in 2019, how many were there? Like 3? And then
So
over 2,000 square foot, I believe we had
huge.
6 or 7. And in 2019, there was 0 because they didn't have them every month. Past 2,000 square foot was an anomaly. It didn't happen every month. And now we have over 5 every month.
So that has made me, and that makes me think of, as we move into 2023 and people have said, okay, where are we right now? One of the things that I get asked all the time about is, if I'm an investor in the Miami market, if I'm going to, or the Fort Lauderdale market, if I'm going to come in and buy something, given that I've seen some people make shockingly large amounts of money in the last couple of years, and Miami, going back, is still the recipient of so much migratory wealth and so much demand from New York and California, because their policies are still not favorable and they're going to still keep coming. What should I be buying and where should I focus on? Because I've had conversations with buyers, and I'm going out with one tomorrow, to build a house, buy land and build a house, renovate a house, those prime values, given the fact that we have so many more transactions at that high level that can justify people paying these higher numbers. You're not buying the most expensive house on the street anymore because 20 others traded at that number. Buying that product right now can still yield incredible returns and will still go up.
Correct, because you're locking in prime land within proximity of the urban core. And if we believe the Miami thesis, which I do, that it's emerging as a 21st century capital and that it's still early days, because most people are incredibly not good at perceiving momentum cycles until it's so big they can't deny it anymore. So I think this is very much early days. And so any residential purchase that locks in that land value within a zone of extreme scarcity, like waterfront, right? You can't build more of that. I think you're aligning yourself with the upward growth of the city. And they're disappearing. So the lots that are being sold for land value with an old house or just empty land, I think 2 years from now, there'll be far fewer.
Yeah.
They're just getting replaced by new and expensive that maxes out the FAR.
Yeah. So when we're saying close to the urban core, let's give people some sense of direction of like, okay, so I'm going to go out and buy a house tomorrow because I've understood, I've spoken, I've heard from Anna, I've heard from David. You guys have done this for 3 years. You got it right every single year. You're tracking the market. You know what's going on. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to invest in Miami because I believe it's still got, great future upside, and all the indexes and all the variables point to low inventory, high demand, and no other variables that will make the market go backwards. And nobody wants to leave. Attrition rates are up 1%. The distance from the urban core that we're talking about, the proximity, first and foremost, let's understand. So we're talking about Venetian Islands, Miami Beach, Coconut Grove, Coral Gables. How far down are we talking? How far away from the urban core are we really kind of looking at here? Driving distance. Let's talk about maybe how long it takes to drive there.
Half hour, 40 minutes. Something that somebody could reasonably commute also.
A reasonable commuting time.
Yeah.
Fair to say.
Yeah.
Okay. So that means if you're in Brickell, you can get to Brickell from where we are right now in 30 minutes quite easily. You can actually go a little further south into Pinecrest and get there in 30 minutes.
Yep.
And you can go north. You could be in Bay Point. You could be in Miami Shores. You could be in Miami Beach. You could be in Venetian Islands. You could be in even potentially Key Biscayne.
Airports close by. Yeah, correct.
So all of the big primary areas all fit that 30-minute
It's just a question of flavor. People might prefer certain areas because they have kids or whatever it is, and we know what the wait lists at private schools are like, so that's not going away.
We do. We've interviewed enough heads of admissions.
Okay, there you go. You know firsthand.
1%. So we take our time to actually meet and interview the heads of admissions. Why? Because a lot of the families that come through and call us say, my biggest problem
is the kid in the school.
Yeah.
I know.
I can find a house,
yeah,
but I need to get a space.
Exactly.
So we try to kind of like smooth that path and make those introductions. And they've said to us quite candidly, the attrition rate in schools right now, which is the rate of the kids who are leaving because they're going to get repositioned in another school in another city, normally they would say it would be about 8%, 9%. Currently, 1%.
Wow.
1%.
That's a great statistic.
It's a crazy statistic.
Wow.
Because it means people, most importantly, wealthy families are not leaving.
No.
And those are the engine
Correct.
for most of our primary
markets. And it's a
markets.
forward-looking indicator also.
It's a great forward-looking indicator.
Yeah.
Because this is not, again, what we used to do when we would sit on the beach when we did our first podcast. We would sit around buildings where a lot of residents, it was a second home. It was an investment property. What's interesting is that we've seen that transition from people using as an investment to a primary. We've seen people go from trying to buy a house and not finding a house and then buying a condo because there's no more big houses available for them. So now they want the vertical living, the big units, which we talked about with Craig. All of these variables point us to upward market direction. And the key is obviously finding the right position, as you put it, within the 30-minute commute to find the right property. And then from there, understanding dollar per square foot movement. So Craig had put out to us that the luxury condo market had gone up 20% in the last 12 months, which is that real luxury, those top, think of, go online and put in the top 10 condos in Miami. I want you to do that because we wrote an article on it. So you can go and read the article and you see our top buildings, whether it's Continuum or Park Grove or Apogee, or think of any other building, 87 Park, Oceana, all of these buildings. Going out and finding units in these buildings is becoming harder and harder. There's less product available because everybody wants to try and buy it. But it then begs the question: how far can this go?
I mean, it's not going to go up at the rate that it had. That was the ascension process to the new reality. But first of all, the luxury condo pipeline is not big. Very few projects have broken ground.
1,100 for the next year, 4,400 for the next 3 or 4 years.
If they break ground.
If they break ground.
And when they break ground.
Yeah.
We don't know how that's going to tear out.
That was a whole other question.
Correct. Who knows? So that landscape
Yeah.
has changed. So there's no huge influx coming at that end.
So the supply, which is part of that supply-demand conversation that we always have, is strangled right now.
Yep.
And there's no other variable. And to build a house, that's 3.5 years.
That's also
3 to 3.5 years.
Correct.
Cities aren't very quick right now.
And then the supply there of waterfront, again, like real prime waterfront, to me, it just seems like such an obvious corollary. It's like buying in New York City along Central Park 80 years ago. You're just locking that in. You can't build more of that.
And some of those buyers come out, and again, another media example, when they would say, well, what about sea level rising? What about flooding? Why would people want to start coming down into Miami and dropping $30 million or $35 million on a luxury waterfront house if we're all going to be underwater in 15 years?
New York's in the same boat.
That's what Craig said. He said, if you actually look at the Eastern Seaboard, they've got more probability, more at risk of flooding than we have.
Yes.
And we're built better with better systems in place.
Yeah, exactly right.
To protect us.
Exactly. That stuff annoys me. People start criticizing Miami, saying, well, Miami can't be great because XYZ doesn't have good transit, this, that, something's, whatever, stuff, cost of living. I say, wait, I grew up in New York City, and I say this with love. I love New York City. I've been here now for 10, 11 years, but I lived in New York most of my life. New York at its zenith was an extremely hostile place to live with extremely expensive housing. Anyone as a young person who ever rented an apartment in New York City has PTSD from the experience forever. Yeah, you pay the broker fee too. So you're paying first, last deposit and the broker fee. And they have some crazy application processes that don't exist here. We have to have like 80 times income or a guarantor if you're under 27. I mean, it's like a nightmare. New York is extremely hostile to live in. The subways are crumbling and increasingly dangerous. It's cold and miserable while you're there also. So
Sell it to me, Anna.
None of this. None of this stopped New York from being considered the capital of the world.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's not that we can't do better or that we shouldn't do better. I think we will do better. But it's unfair that we get picked on for things that New York never did better.
That's usually a comment that I remember, again, Craig has said, he said, look, they always use that as a last resort comment. If they're going to try and bash you, that's the last resort comment. Go out and look at the houses that are actually now new, the new ones that are being built and that have been built in the last couple of years. I was out looking at Allison Island earlier today, and it's just lots of new stuff being built. But what's interesting is how they're building it. My wife builds. She owns Design Solutions, well-known interior design firm, builds great houses. They built a very well-known house on Venetian Islands that now the guy's been offered, I think, 45 million at the last count for his house that cost him 15.
Amazing.
Incredible returns. That house has a seawall that rises 15 feet above the neighboring house.
Yep.
I mean, these houses are built to be resistant. And whether it's the Tesla roof now to keep itself running, the high seawall, or the re-engineering of the roads and the pipes underneath to get things working, or whether you've got to the west, you've got the conversation of the Everglades absorbing a lot of the water,
right,
and us actually having infrastructure designed to combat, should a storm hit, the effectiveness of our services to handle.
Correct.
Is something that people seem to somewhat forget. So
they forget and they discount the capabilities of the human mind. And when you have great people with resources converging upon a place, they'll figure things out. It's not going to always be the same. People forget our phones were magic 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And now it's ubiquitous. It's nothing. So we don't know. But once there's a will to make something happen and you have good people in a place, solutions appear.
So now we talk about having people in the right place. And this is the conversation that started, and again, people get into the dialogue now with the companies that have moved into Miami. And again, everyone talks about Citadel because it's the big elephant in the room. It's like, this big behemoth company comes in, huge influence, huge amount of financial groups that actually travel around them, that are the satellites to this. They orbit this monolith of a business. All ever coming in, and more still coming in. More business coming in. So money's in, more tech coming in. We know we're in the infancy. It's still early days for Miami as as an engine, as a US engine. Right. But by God, there's absolutely no shortage of wealth down here.
Agree.
And that doesn't seem to be stopping anytime soon.
Agree. And again, just on a boots on the ground level, we had more new business applications filed per capita than any other city in the country.
In what period?
I think this last year.
Okay.
2021.
So That's maybe a good message for those out there who, again, have been thinking about moving into Miami after they've seen all the influx of other companies. We kind of knew that that was going to be a force. That was going to be a force that would, again, you get a big company. It's not just the company, it's all the other businesses
just
that rely on it.
The culture. People are coming here to do things, not just retire and park money. That's completely changed, completely. And I don't think that people are resistant to this concept. Maybe they're jealous. As I said, haters for the Wall Street
Haters
Journal
will
article.
hate.
Haters are fans too, right? They're paying attention. But it's just the reality of how people perceive Miami is changing. Very, very much so. It's no longer just that vacation place. I love those two stats, the new business formations and the stat about the young people who are the successful young people moving here. Those to me are such positive forward indicators. And
the young people moving in here and talking about, again, because look, it's great to talk about the guys with a $30, $40, $50 million price tickets and the high end, the luxury market, which comes in at $2,000 plus a square foot. One of the obviously elements of any city and the engine within the city is the workforce.
Yep. Exactly.
The labor force of young people coming in. Do you have any I mean, obviously you just gave us a statistic now. That migration of young professionals coming in, because they put out the question, again online, some of the media said, it's becoming unaffordable for those young professionals. Is that the case?
Is New York ever affordable for young professionals? I almost don't even like addressing these questions because they're so biased. Did anyone ever ask New York, like, hey, you're really hostile and unaffordable to new graduates or new professionals? Like, obviously, it's like saying the sky is blue. So why are we being maligned for being a less severe version of what New York has always been? Not that I'm saying we can't do better. And on that front, actually, a super positive thing, we have more we have a huge amount of multifamily apartment buildings under construction within Miami, within the downtown Edgewater, that whole area that's filling in. We have, I believe, the highest percentage based upon existing inventory under construction now than any city in America.
What's your opinion on multifamily? I'm curious to know, because obviously it's something that we go into residential, but understanding all the other businesses and the other types of real estate around residential, single family and condo, multifamily is something that...
Right, so when I'm saying multifamily in this case, I'm meaning large professionally managed apartment buildings.
Okay.
And that's what's being built at scale in Edgewater, downtown. And they're kind of like, these modern versions are like highly amenitized solutions. Many of them are furnished. They have your work-life stuff. They have all those things there. Yep. They can have short leases, long leases, whatever it is. So there are easy ways for young professionals to come and move.
Yep.
And they offer housing. It's great. We had the largest median rent increase in the nation.
Really?
So, yeah, we did.
So the rent still from 2022 to 2023?
No. It's slowed down now, but I'm saying during the COVID period.
Yes.
Yeah. So it still hasn't gone down. It's still gone up. It hasn't dropped, but the rate has decreased, right? But we desperately need new rental inventory. So that's a great thing.
Rental inventory is one of those interesting things when people talk the investment markets and they talk about buying a condo or buying a house. And I've sold clients houses and they've rented and done very, very well. I've had a client buy stuff from LA last year, bought it, rented out, made a nice 7.5%, 8% and then made another 20% when they sold it. So that was a good day. It's a good day in the office for them, a good day for me. The interesting thing that I'm looking at when I'm looking at these changing behaviors as we move forward is that there's going to always be within the system elements of the city that do really, really well. Mm-hmm. But there's also elements of risk. And I'm curious to know, from your point of view, are there areas that you would say, be careful about this? Be careful about this particular sort of situation over here, this particular product?
I mean, truly, the products that have always given me some hesitation in South Florida or Miami have been just the older buildings.
Yeah.
And now, of course, they have the new reserve rule coming in effect. They'll have to have reserves. So many of them are they're selling them right to developers, or they're going to have assessments that are a huge percentage of their assessed value. So that product type has always scared me because I've never necessarily trusted associations with their ability to do maintenance over a 40, 50-year period in those products.
Well, it's quite interesting because so let's talk about that older product, because again, when people come into the city, I don't think it's not intelligent to come in and say, just go into Coconut Grove or Brickell or anywhere else, Miami Beach or something else, and just buy a condo or buy a house. There are some things that you need to look very carefully at. And statistically speaking, we talked about the probabilities. There's always a possibility of you making money and any area, but is it probable? And there's probabilities of risk within certain product. So the older condos, and when the Chaplin Tower collapsed, the 40-year period of assessment got changed so they would bring it in earlier at 25. And if you look at the demographic profile of these older buildings, what we've noticed is that it's very hard for a lot of these residents to actually pay for any kind of assessment.
They're in fixed income.
And if it's a big one, like a $50 million assessment.
Correct. So that's a tough spot.
And that will then obviously then lead to developers looking to buy up those older buildings.
And we have the Live Local Act now, which supersedes local zoning law, right? The Live Local Act allows for if a certain percent of the building is deemed affordable housing or cost attainable housing, I think it's 30% they require, then you can build up to the height and unit count of any building on a mixed use lot within a mile of the suggested spot.
Oh.
Yeah. The Clevelanders getting press on this now.
Really?
Yeah. The owners of the Clevelander are, they just don't like Miami Beach though. They're doing this to create headlines. They're saying because of Live Local, we can now build a 30-floor building there.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, and that's that area. And again, there's a lot of old buildings through Miami-Dade, up the coastline, along the beach. And of course, they start to continuously look into these, what causes the crumbling or the potential collapse of the building.
I did a lot of press after Champlain, and I did an interview I did a whole episode with The Guardian, the UK.
Okay.
No, I'm sorry, the BBC for this. And the BBC asked me, did the Champlain Towers fall because of global warming? I swear to God, they asked me this.
I would have thought better from people at the BBC.
I told him, I said, no, in fact, it was a trifecta of negligence, corruption, and incompetence.
Yeah. And there's a lot of conversations when it gets into buying a house or buying a condo. When you're dealing with a condo situation, you're not driving the bus.
Correct.
You're a passenger.
Correct.
And you have to go whatever direction that the driver wants to go.
And that direction could change after you purchase. New people could come in. You really don't know. Correct. Yeah.
When we look and we analyze the condo market, we look very closely, not just, we look at the line, we look at the views, we look at the conditions, we look at all the amenities and all the services, and again, all these newer buildings. But we get into the financials.
Yep. It's very important.
Their fees, what they met at the last meeting, the disclosed and undisclosed minutes. There's a lot of things that can go wrong in buildings if the management behind the building or the homeowners association are being, I say negligent, but they are refusing to face reality.
Correct.
That's when things can go sideways. And that's why we'll always say, look, when you get into the older buildings and you're interested, and again, because the prices have gone up so much, there's a lot of buyers who are out there on Miami Beach saying, David, I have $3, $4, $5 million. If I had a dollar for every time someone said to me, I want a 3 or 4 bedroom unit between $3 and $5 million on Miami Beach that's nice, I'd probably have enough dollars to actually buy one of those condos to begin with. But what I'm finding is that they're actually really hard to come by. You cannot get into a newer building on Miami Beach, a large 3 or 4 bedroom unit between $3 and $5 million. It doesn't exist. You have to go up to between $3,000 to $4,000 a square foot, at least, to get into these kind of buildings, which leads you with the older buildings.
Correct.
And there's a lot of them.
Correct.
So I guess the message there is be careful with that.
It's not necessarily bad. I'm just saying it has to do the word. Like you need to do your homework, do extra homework. Correct.
Yeah. And then obviously with homes, what we've noticed, and this is part of the insurance situation, these older houses that people get drawn to and say, this looks really nice because they renovated the inside. One of the challenges there that I've said to clients this year about buying a home in Miami in the primary markets, again, we've said, if you're close to the urban core and you're 30 minutes and you can migrate to the urban core and you can buy a property, then long-term the values are going to go up and it's great. One of the few challenges that we have is that some of these older houses are experiencing some really big increases in the insurance premiums to the point that it's almost superseding the cost of their taxes. And if you are a working wealthy and you've got a $2 million home, but you're paying $60,000 a year on your insurance, that is going to put you off from buying that kind of house and looking to a drier area.
Correct.
So my message has always been, look at the flood zone area. Try and buy in a dry lot, safe away from flood zone.
Correct.
Before you start looking at stuff down towards the water.
100%, I agree.
Which is, it's a key element. So there's lots of moving parts. What I've always said is, if you want to get granular, you need to have the direct conversation.
Correct.
Pick up the phone, give us
Correct.
a call. Anna is, just so you guys know, Anna is one of the contributing minds within the David Siddons Group. You are a trusted source of information.
Thank
We
you.
share and we talk. I value your opinion enormously.
Likewise.
You're very well studied. You don't just take what's been put out there in the online ether and just regurgitate it. You do your own research.
Correct.
And you've always done your own
Always,
research
yeah.
for as long as I've known you.
Yes, everything has to fit within a unified thesis.
Yeah.
Back to what we talked about is you can't get distracted by news, by headlines, by all these things, because again, nothing lives in isolation, right? It's like, so I studied kind of like theoretical math and physics. So you
Yeah.
write proofs.
By the way, Anna, if you haven't figured it out already, you have your master's from Columbia.
No, not master's. I just undergrad.
Oh, you have your
Yeah,
undergraduate
yeah.
from Columbia.
Yeah.
And you did mathematics.
Like theoretical math, like
Theoretical
space-time physics,
mathematics. Yeah,
weird
so
stuff.
like you're
I was the
basically
youngest
like
person, only girl in
rocket
my class.
scientist.
So anyway, so it's just an insight into how I think, because I approach everything kind of like writing a proof.
Yeah.
You have to, it's like a logic exercise.
Yes.
You have to start very, very baseline, define things as true and go from there.
Yes.
And so if there's any hole in your chain, you're done. You can't have trust in your conclusions. And that's why I've trusted my own insights, even when they're at odds with other people's or the press, whatever it is, because I know how I got to them. I know how I derived them. And it goes back to recognizing what is driving your momentum cycle, and then recognizing that everything lives within a cycle. And then also at a very fundamental level, we have to accept that change is a constant. Change is a constant. And what we define kind of as, people often say that history is change, right? Because we have this linear notion of time, even though time doesn't really exist, but in our minds, we make it a linear thing. And humans herd. Human herding behavior is a thing. They go from this place to that place. No place is the capital forever. That's not a dramatic statement. It's a basic fact, right? Humans herd. Conditions change, they herd. So it's almost like this human herding behavior that we see over history is the change that we perceive is the aggregate of human herding behavior. Yeah. That's it.
Human herding behavior is a very obvious behavior that you see within real estate.
Yes.
Because people find safety in numbers. And
100%.
I stood
and momentum builds.
Yeah, they do.
Always.
And it's amazing how you see it, because culturally, we've studied the condo markets and we've noticed, and I remember going way back, we would see, again, I can say this because my wife is from Brazil, my operations director is Brazilian, and I have other team members who are also Brazilian. But
my coach is Brazilian.
And your coach is Brazilian. So there's within certain cultures, there's definitely a very strong herd mentality instinct that is very present, and you can see it. So people will go in, they'll say, well, I say, why did you buy that condo? And they'll say, because my friend bought a condo, and his friend bought a condo, and 5 other people. So I feel safe that all these other 5 people did it. And sometimes I say, well, they all screwed up.
It could be.
So don't necessarily follow them off the cliff.
But it gives people comfort, 100%.
It does. And I think that, when we come into this, the great thing about real estate from an investment perspective is, surprisingly, there are so many clear patterns that present themselves. Yes. And from whether it's the 2021 interview that we did or the 2022 or even today at 2023, these patterns still remain. We still see them ever so clearly. And history, you just see it coming around again and again and again.
Not new. Human nature is our constant, really.
Yeah.
It's human nature, and then the change we perceive is the aggregate of human herding behavior.
Perfectly put. And on that note, I think that's about it for today.
And it is early days in Miami along this thesis. I'm going to recap this thesis and say it here. The post-COVID spike that we saw cannot last. That was like a pressure thing, a post-cataclysmic event. Now we're settling in around this new normal, and it's still early stages of this shift in the world, of the momentum cycle. And one thing I've been saying is that, New York was the capital of the 20th century world. Before that, it was London. Before that, it was Amsterdam. Those cities are not dead. They're still there. There's just a shift in focus. Oh, and on the topic of shift in focus, I think it was Bloomberg had an article a month or 2 ago saying that now for the first time since they've measured this, the 6 fastest growing southern states, of which Florida is one, account for more of national GDP than the Washington, New York, Boston corridor. And they called it a shift in power, shift in focus, whatever you want to say. That's what's going on. And it's early days.
So it means that this time next year, we'll do another one of these, and we'll see how the shift has occurred through to next year. Because, as you put it, change is a certainty.
That's right.
But, when you get your data, as always, we say, use sources where they have good information, legitimate information, not regurgitated.
And as close to the source as possible.
As close to the source. And both of us are active with clients every day. We actually sell real estate, and we actually analyze real estate, and we have our own softwares to analyze real estate. So, point being, if you want to make a better decision, stay close to the source.
Well said.
Anna, thank you.
Thank you very
much. As always, love you. Really appreciate this. And as always, stay tuned for another episode of the Better Decisions podcast coming soon. Thank you.